Welcome to CGTN's continuing year-end special as we follow the midnight hour around the world to witness nations far and wide ring in the new year. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Now it has just gone midnight in Southeast Asia and we are going to show you some live pictures of a spectacular fireworks display coming from Bangkok, Thailand. Well, those fireworks are lighting up the night sky in a place called Central World. It has been dubbed the Times Square of Asia there in Bangkok, Thailand, a tradition that has taken place for almost 20 years, certainly creating memorable moments in a way that is somehow projecting hopefulness and inspiration for the year ahead. This event is being broadcast live in an effort to limit the number of people that would actually gather to witness this event in person. And that, of course, is in line with a number of safety precautions that have been taken in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Nevertheless, it is proving to be a spectacular event and one that many across the world, and of course, especially in Thailand, will most certainly be enjoying. Well, you've just been looking at these live pictures from Bangkok, Thailand, of a special fireworks display to ring in the new year. And of course, a very happy new year to all our viewers in that part of the world. Indeed, there are many parts of the globe where it is still 2021, and that includes the entire African continent. But as we've just seen, some parts of the world, like Southeast Asia, are already welcoming in 2022. Now, Southeast Asia is made up of 11 countries. Among them is Indonesia, which is the world's largest island country. Classified as a newly industrialized country, Indonesia is the 15th largest economy in the world by nominal GDP. The country, which is a member of the G7, has struggled with the Rohingya refugee crisis. Another key country is Cambodia, a constitutional monarchy with an elected parliamentary form of government. It has a population of 15 million people. Buddhism is enshrined in the constitution as the official state religion and is practiced by more than 97% of the population. Thailand is the second largest economy in Southeast Asia. The World Bank has classified the country as one of the great development success stories due to smart economic policies. Well, let's cross live now to our CGTN correspondent, Martin Loh. He is in Bangkok, Thailand, and he'll be telling us all about the New Year celebrations. Martin, firstly, a very happy New Year to you. Tell us about tell us how Bangkok is actually welcoming the New Year.
Yeah, well, as you say, Happy New Year. It has just got midnight here, so it is now the New Year in Southeast Asia. It is 2022. There's a massive fireworks display going on, fireworks shooting up into the night sky. We've had a full celebration here in downtown Bangkok. We've heard from Thai pop bands, Thai chart singers. There's been more sedate music from the Thailand Philharmonic Orchestra. We had a 10-second countdown at midnight, and now we have this firework display which is due to last for a full 7 minutes. And a lot of effort has gone into this. This is one of the main events across Asia. It is being flagged up as Asia's equivalent to Times Square in New New York. Now, across the world's capitals, New Year's Eve celebrations have been cancelled or curtailed because of the problems caused by COVID-19. And although here a full show is going on, we've been affected as well. Nearly all of the New Year celebrations across Thailand have been cancelled by orders of the authorities. Certainly all the civic events that had been organised up and down the country are not going ahead. This has been given special permission to go ahead here in downtown Bangkok, with one big difference. They had hoped for and expected around 250,000 people, 250,000 people, to be here and watch this live and join with us in celebrating the New Year. They've all been told they have to stay at home, and so in its place, all of this that we're seeing here is being broadcast on Thai television. It's also being streamed live on social media. So sadly, although there are plenty of people in the streets around who are looking up into the night sky, the actual official audience can't be here.
Well, they're just we could barely hear Martin Lowe over the sound of that fantastic fireworks display. Of course, he was joining us from Bangkok, Thailand, and indeed a Happy New Year to him. Now, CGTN anchors who have diligently brought to you the news as it breaks throughout 2021 have also taken their time to wish you a Happy New Year for 2022. Let's take a listen.
On souhaite traditionnellement, lors des vœux pour la nouvelle année, le bonheur, la prospérité, la santé. Et bien entendu, je vous souhaite tout cela, et même plus que jamais. Mais j'ai envie d'ajouter le brin de folie, l'inventivité et l'énergie, la force et le courage, afin de mener à bien tous vos projets cette année. Excellente année 2022 à tous.
Je vous souhaite à tous et à toutes une belle et heureuse année 2022. Je profite de cette occasion pour sincèrement vous remercier de votre fidélité tout au long de cette année compliquée. Que tous mes vœux de bonheur, santé et succès vous accompagnent en 2022.
Merci à vous tous de votre présence. À chacun et à chacune de vous, je vous présente mes meilleurs vœux. Les meilleurs vœux les plus sincères de santé, de succès et de prospérité. À vous-même, à vos familles et à vos proches. Que 2022 puisse être meilleur que 2021. Bonne et heureuse année 2022.
Right, let's turn our attention now to some news of the day. 6 soldiers have been killed by insurgents in Borno State, the epicenter of the insurgency in Nigeria. They're from Nigeria and Niger and were among troops of the multinational joint task force keeping the peace in the Lake Chad Basin. But the troops have also dealt a blow to the insurgents, killing 22 of them. Correspondent Tatjana Schoenmaker reports.
Spokesman for the Multinational Joint Task Force, Colonel Mohammed Dole, says the casualties were recorded during an operation by the troops to clear insurgents in the Malam Fatori area of Borno State. He says the troops were registered by the insurgents who engaged them in a fierce gun battle. 16 other soldiers were wounded as a result, but the troops forced the insurgents to abandon their enclaves. Military authorities say beyond the troops killing 22 of the insurgents, 5 gun trucks, motorcycles and other ammunition were recovered from them. Boko Haram is a terror group operating mostly in Nigeria's northeast region and some countries around Lake Chad, such as Cameroon, Chad, and Niger Republic. The United Nations says attacks by the insurgents have killed more than 35,000 people and left 8.7 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. Tessim Akendi, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
And let's go to Sudan now, where the death toll from the latest nationwide protests against military rule in Sudan rose to 5 on Friday. That's according to the Central Committee of Sudanese Doctors. Police say a further 297 demonstrators and 49 members of the police force were wounded in Thursday's protests involving tens of thousands of people. Security forces reportedly fired tear gas and stun grenades at the demonstrators who were marching towards the presidential palace. Thursday's protest marked the 11th round of major demonstrations since the October 25 takeover that saw Abdallah Hamdok removed and then reinstated as prime minister. Demonstrators have demanded that the military play no role in government during a transition to free elections. Meanwhile, Military Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has granted more powers and immunity to the security services and regular forces.
Yes, yesterday there was the protest in all Sudan from many different places in many towns, more than 12 states in Sudan. In Khartoum, the capital, there was cutting the internet and the cell phone international connections, and they closed the bridge with the chip container. Yesterday at 3 p.m. there was shot in Umdurman direction. There is 4 people that got killed, and they shot them by guns, and 2 of them in their hands and 1 in the chest. They passed immediately before they being able to catch him in the hospital. And there is also another 40 that got injured by the guns, and 160 that got injured by beating by the sticks. We can say the repression from the security there was very tough yesterday. They beat them, there was violation, aggression against them. There was very tough to the protesters, and they were fighting them like an enemy, not like a peaceful way. So it was unacceptable at all, and that's why it's a lot of people there. And still right now the situation is very critical. Well, there is no declaration from the general commander. There is any reports from him. No one say anything, even the prime minister. Everybody wants for hear something from those people in the government, but no one give anything. But the counsel for the general commander, he say the way if we're going the street and asking, this is not a good way, this is kind of wasting, and we're moving to our country to a bad place. This is not gonna be good for both of us. The only situation is, and the only solution, he can say this, is like to sit together and make a new agreement, sit together for dialogue again.
Well, on to West Africa now. A conference tasked with proposing a timetable for elections in Mali is recommending a delay. It says polls should be delayed for between 6 months and 5 years due to insecurity. Initially, the transitional government, led by Colonel Assimi Goïta, had agreed to steer Mali through democratic elections in February of 2022. It's now blaming the lack of progress on disorganization and the insurgency in the north. Goïta's government has said it will consider the conference's recommendations and issue an election calendar by the end of January. The transition government has been in power since May following the overthrow of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Regional bloc ECOWAS has since imposed sanctions on the coup leaders with threats to introduce more if government does not stick to holding elections in February. Now, earlier we spoke to Dr. Isaka Soware, the director of the Sahel and West Africa program at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, about how Mali will approach the regional bloc ECOWAS with the new proposals.
I don't think they will go to 5 years. Not only the regional bloc, but also socio-political forces in the country. But as it is a range, 6 months to 5 years, it's unlikely that the elections that were originally scheduled for February would be held at that time, at that date. But I think something closer to 6 months, or perhaps higher than that, but not approaching 5 years. This is the third time, the third military coup in Mali in recent years, and one was in 2012, during which ECOWAS imposed harsh sanctions, blockading the country, and there were dire consequences for the population. That is the reason why ECOWAS is trying to limit the effect of sanctions to the ruling actors, that is the government and those associated with the government. So with the travel bans and asset freezes, if the date that the transition authority will come up, as they say, at the end of January, is not consensual first in Mali, I think that will embolden ECOWAS in its move to impose sanctions. And also ECOWAS would then be able to garner the support of other actors of the international community, particularly the European Union, and that could hit hard the Malian authorities. Of course, if they are hit hard, there can be some consequences for the populations, but I think ECOWAS are trying to minimize any effect their sanctions may have on the populations.
Francophone Africa has seen many changes over the last year. From coups to a continued rise in militant attacks, the region's relationship with its former colonial master, France, is also changing. CGTN's Astatel breaks this down for us.
2021 was quite the year for Franco-Africa relations. In the Sahel, France announced a major change to how it would support countries in their fight against terrorism. France entered the region in 2013 when it helped Mali quell a growing insurgency in the country's north. This year it announced that it would close down Opération Barkhane in the first quarter of 2022. It pledged to maintain a military presence in the region, looking to find other partners to support its efforts in the Sahel. Mali, led by a military junta, began seeking partnerships of their own, engaging with the private Russian security firm Wagner. France strongly condemned the move.
France has learned lessons from the Wagner Group's involvement in the Central African Republic, where it was more or less caught by surprise and saw these companies getting involved in the CAR alongside the Russian government's involvement. And there, France was caught by surprise, which is something clearly the French government would like to avoid, hence these very vocal opposition towards the Wagner Group.
France has for long maintained a strong sphere of influence over its former colonies. Anti-government protests have grown this year in countries such as Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Local populations have expressed frustrations at not only a lack of progress on the war against terrorism, a weak economy, but also France's involvement in their respective countries.
It has to do with the modes of engagement of France in post-independence Africa. France is an actor in French-speaking Africa, as much as it could be a collateral damage, but France is also an actor. We know France commands a lot of influence in French-speaking countries. Sometimes this influence is a bit exaggerated, as at least as the way it is perceived in African public opinions. But the reality is that France had been, for the longest time, the most important trade partners of many French-speaking countries.
While this may have been the case, Francophone Africa has continued to show a willingness to engage with other partners.
What we see in Mali today is an attempt by an African country also to diversify its security partners to the ire of France. So it's a process that will have ups and downs, but I think France is becoming lesser and lesser influential in many African countries. And this is a fact that the French government will have to take into account.
France has over the past year made overtures to reshape its relations with Africa. This includes hosting the France-Africa Summit in the French city of Montpellier. No African leaders were present. Instead, members of Africa's civil society, artists, entrepreneurs were among those invited. The French presidency said the summit looked to give Africa's youths a voice, and indeed young Africans held French President Emmanuel Macron to task. As we head into 2022, it remains to be seen whether this and other efforts will be enough to maintain France's influence in the region. For now, I'm Asatal with CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, schools in Uganda are set to reopen in January after 2 years of closure over COVID-19 restrictions.
this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
The tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
within clear view of this front line position.
Several countries across Europe will ring in the new year under a raft of restrictions as EU states grapple with surging cases of the Omicron variant of COVID-19. In the past week, France, Greece, Portugal, Italy and Spain all set daily records for positive cases. The World Health Organization warns that the simultaneous circulation of different strains is driving a wave of infections. Benji Haya reports from Brussels.
For many in Europe, New Year's Eve last year was spent under lockdown. Few could have imagined that 12 months later, people would be bidding farewell to 2021 under fresh COVID-19 restraints. Paris's famous New Year's Eve celebrations have officially been scrapped. The concerts on the Champs-Élysées cancelled. Large gatherings aren't allowed in Germany either. Only 10 people can legally congregate there. That means no big events in Berlin and other major cities. Instead, a small fireworks display will be broadcast live on TV. In Italy, public events are banned. Greece has called off its festivities normally held at iconic sites, including the Acropolis in Athens. The Spanish capital, Madrid, is one of just a few European capitals where public celebrations will go ahead. Authorities are limiting numbers to 7,000. Attendees are required to wear masks and observe social distancing. Meanwhile, London's New Year's Eve event in Trafalgar Square is off. It had been organised to replace the fireworks, which usually attract thousands of visitors to the banks of the River Thames. Yet pubs and nightclubs in England are open. Boris Johnson resisting calls to impose curbs. In its New Year's Eve message, the UK's Prime Minister says Britain is incomparably better in terms of the position to fight against COVID-19 than it was at the end of 2020. That's because of vaccinations. As Europe embraces 2022, the focus is turning to how to deal with this pandemic in the long term. Greece following Italy and Spain in easing its isolation rules in an effort to keep key industries afloat which have been suffering from shortages of staff. And from January 4th, Germany will allow fully vaccinated Brits to enter without the need for quarantine. Benji Haya, CGTN, Brussels.
Well, the coronavirus pandemic certainly made 2021 a tough year. We spoke to Kenyans about the year that was and their expectations for 2022. Take a listen.
Obviously, after very many months, it starts getting, the anxiety levels start rising. The kids get bored staying at home throughout. So suppose ending the partial lockdown and people just getting back to their lives has been a very positive change.
Tough. Because of the pandemic, it's been a tough year because things slowed down economically and also even at our workplace. So many things had to hold. I work in a university, so even the academic year had to be so much delayed. We believe the Kenyan government or us as a people, we've taken the measures that are needed and we are seeing the COVID is slowing down, though there's the new variant. But we believe our government will do the best to make sure that we move on with life as it should be. So we are very hopeful for the next year.
We got COVID in September, but we recovered. She also had it, thanks to supplements and all that, and the good weather that we have in Nairobi. So we are grateful that we are still here to talk about it. We are hoping for 2022. There's hope. We can only hope that things will get better. Because I think when you panic, things get worse. But when you have hope, you get better.
Meanwhile, schools in Uganda are set to reopen in January after 2 years of closure following COVID-19 lockdown restrictions. But as learning institutions prepare to receive students, there's concern that some teachers, especially those attached to private schools, may not return to the classroom. It's believed many quit the profession to join more lucrative business ventures. Michael Baleke has more.
Shafik Mbabazi was a teacher of chemistry and mathematics at secondary school. But when schools were shut down during the pandemic, he was forced to look elsewhere to earn a living. Shafik has since ventured into the motorbike taxi business, set up a food store, and also runs a men's hair salon.
Of course, I'm not getting much, but at least I'm able to sustain myself, sustain my family, sustain my parents, and all the people who I take care of, with the little I'm receiving, and with the ease.
Shafik has now decided to quit the classroom and concentrate on his businesses. He says the 2-year school closure has killed his morale.
Some of us who came up from humble backgrounds, we wanted a course that was perfect. We wanted a course that we feel is going to feed us for the rest of our lives, until when God calls us. But then at the moment, time reached when we cannot use what we studied to do anything. So it pushed us to the walls. So when you say, do I feel betrayed? I can say yes.
When the schools closed in early 2020, the government continued to pay the wages of state school teachers. But for private schools that solely relied on parents for fees, incomes dried up, and most schools had to reduce or stop paying teachers' salaries. School administrators are now worried that as schools reopen, a shortage of teachers is likely.
There's not been any training for teachers since lockdown. So they feel that we are in the field, either have to be convinced to come back and resume the duty, or schools will have to think otherwise.
However, teachers or no teachers, most schools have started preparing ground for the new term. The government has tagged the school reopening program to the vaccination of teachers, but the Ministry of Education says out of 550,000 teachers, less than 9,000 have received the jab. The COVID-19 crisis has claimed the lives of more than 3,000 Ugandans, some of them parents. And while measures have succeeded in containing the outbreak so far, they have also caused significant damage to the economy, devastating livelihoods. This means many more children will not be able to return to school.
There are schools that had loans in banks. I know of some schools which have been sold off. I heard of a school that already announced not opening, and already parents have been sent circulars telling them to look for schools elsewhere. So those are some of the challenges that schools are likely to face.
The government is on course to open schools in the second week of January. But for the teachers like Shafik, the COVID-19 pandemic means that when schools reopen, they won't be there. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thanks, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Zimbabwe bounces back to food self-sufficiency after 2 successive droughts. And South Sudan's economic recovery hit by severe flooding and COVID-19 pandemic.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in South Sudan, where the continent's youngest nation, where the government has been in overdrive to steady its economy, struggling in the face of difficulties presented by flooding and, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet with the details.
South Sudan's road to economic recovery is driven by the 2018 peace agreement, which brought relative tranquility after 6 years of violence in the country. Rising oil prices and a resumption in oil production brought hope to many here. But locust invasion and the COVID-19 pandemic have derailed the recovery.
I am a widow. I have no brothers, no father, and I have children. I bring goods to the market and people don't buy much. I think day and night on how to feed the children, how to buy clothes for them, and how to educate them.
We are trying our level best, but people don't buy goods because they don't have money. The government needs to find lasting peace for us.
The government is still unable to clear salary arrears for civil servants. Civil servants have not received salaries for 4 months now, despite the International Monetary Funds, or IMF, injecting more than $500 million into South Sudan's economy in 2021.
It was very heartening to hear from politicians, from leaders in this country, that the government is committed to promoting transparency, tackle corruption, improve governance, particularly in the oil sector, where a lot of accountability and transparency is needed. Very heartening to hear the government's commitment. Also, to promote transparency on the spending side, to make sure that the government, the resources the government has, can be explained in terms of how it's being used. Salaries are being paid.
Prices of basic goods remain high across the country. However, the government insists things are improving.
There is relative reduction in prices. Of course, the prices did not come down at the same level of the appreciation of the exchange rate. And there are external reasons. In South Sudan, mostly we are importing the food that we eat here. And the evidence shows that the food prices globally has gone up, and therefore when we bring expensive imports of food from abroad, we are also importing that price. That's one of the main reasons, really, why, of course, the prices have not come down at the same level as the drop of the exchange rate.
Floods in 6 out of the country's 10 states washed away crops and livestock. That will force many here to depend on imported food and food aid. The country depends on oil money to get the hard currency it uses to import goods. Petroleum money funds more than 98% of the government's budget, but with most oil fields on the verge of being overrun by flooding, the economic recovery is still not yet in sight. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Well, let's head to Zimbabwe now, where after 2 successive droughts, the country has bounced back to food self-sufficiency in 2021. A good rainy season increased output of major crops, which had a positive effect on the entire economy. Well, from Harare, CGTN's Farai Mwakutoya reports on Zimbabwe's agricultural boom that has sparked an economic recovery.
Production of grains was spurred by a conservation farming technique that's aimed at mitigating climate change. More than 2.2 million households were supplied with inputs to roll it out.
They were required to adopt all the tenets and the principles of conservation agriculture, including minimum soil disturbance, mulching, the religious adoption of crop rotations. So it was quite a flagship program, and it contributed significantly. In fact, it contributed over 40% to the national grain or maize output.
By the end of November, more than 1.2 million tons of grain had been delivered, compared to just 327,000 tons at the same time last year. Other crops also grew, including tobacco, where deliveries rose 13%, and cotton, which achieved its highest yield in 5 years. Overall, agriculture grew by 34% this year, and that's had a ripple effect on the entire economy, which will expand by more than 6%.
Both the food and the cash crops, I think there was a huge increase in output, which obviously also had a positive effect on the industrial sector. We CZI has already said that they're expecting capacity utilization to end the year at about 61%, and it's largely on account of the huge inputs coming from agriculture.
To sustain the performance, government launched an agricultural recovery plan to address 4 critical Ps.
P number 1 is production. We definitely have to upscale our production. P number 2 is productivity. We need to upscale our productivity. In fact, that's our smartest way out of the woods in terms of food insecurity. Then the other P is obviously profitability, especially at farmhold level. That's the other P. And then, of course, the last P is partnerships and collaborations.
The latter encourages private funding for farmers.
It is a good thing that this past season has already shown us that there is room and capacity to grow. All we need to do is to reconfigure the financing of agriculture so that we bring in more sustainable means to produce and crowd in private sector so that the private sector is more involved in the actual production.
Contract farming arrangements that have been hugely successful in tobacco are being extended to other crops. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, the year 2021 saw the start of trading under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. The pact aims to boost intra-African trade for more than 1.3 billion people on the African continent. While CGTN's Ridwan Karim Dini Osman takes a look at the progress of the trade deal so far and, of course, expectations in the years ahead.
Ghana's beverage manufacturing company, Casapreco, was among the first businesses in the country to export to South Africa under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. The company says it had in the past struggled to penetrate the East African and Southern African markets.
If you look at South Africa, they have a block where they call the SADC. They have quota system that prevents you from entering, and it's been very, very difficult for us. I believe that the introduction of this after, if all those bottlenecks or the quota system duty are taken off, we're going to improve on the volume than before. And I think we will have a clearer opportunity to position our brand or our product in the market to compete.
Nearly a year after its implementation, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement Secretariat says 54 countries have signed up and 34 others have ratified the pact. The Secretariat has also struck partnerships with tech companies to deploy digitally enabled platforms to connect small businesses, women in trade and young entrepreneurs to new markets on the African continent.
To overcome the condition that our continent has been in for many decades, we must accelerate industrial development. By designing appropriate rules of origin or local content requirements that foster industrial development in Africa, we will be able to ensure that we develop value-added, made-in-Africa production, creating millions of jobs for young Africans.
The UN Trade and Development Body, UNCTAD, says less than half of African countries have recorded inclusive growth in the last 20 years, leaving 34% below the poverty line. Economists suggest the engagement seen under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement this year show better prospects of the trade deal in the next year.
I think they are on the right track, looking at what I've seen over this 1 year. But there are a lot of policy strategies that has to be implemented, that has to be accepted, a lot of custom harmonizations, currency harmonization.
However, economists are worried that in light of new COVID-19 variants like Omicron, Africa must find a safe way to reopen its borders.
The World Bank estimates that when implemented effectively, the African Continental Free Trade Area will lift 30 million people in the region out of extreme poverty and 70 million from moderate poverty by 2035. It is hoped that as Africa reopens its land borders from next year, the trade deal could see a further boost. Ridwan Karim Dini Osman, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
And to some international news now. January 1st, 2022 marks exactly 1 year since a historic UK-EU trade deal came into force. Now, the agreement, signed in December 2020, days before the deadline, sets out Britain's relationship with the European Union from outside of the bloc, and that's after almost half a century of membership. Well, Benji Haya reports from Brussels on the feeling in the EU's capital 12 months after the deal.
Christmas Eve 2020, following years of negotiations, finally a breakthrough.
At the end of a successful negotiations journey, I normally feel joy. But today, I only feel quite satisfaction and, frankly speaking, relief.
And where are you going to take this one?
That was the EU's immediate reaction to this, a new trade deal which was implemented exactly a year ago.
Good, well thank you very much everybody.
Until the end of the Brexit transition period, Britain effectively stayed part of the EU's customs union and single market. Yet this deal meant an end to freedom of movement of people and goods. The value of UK products exported across the English Channel fell by nearly half in the first month of 2021. And whilst that has recovered slightly, imports to Europe from Britain are on average 13% below pre-pandemic levels. For many, it's not just about the facts and figures, but their identity. At a vigil held on New Year's Eve last year in Brussels, British expats mourned Brexit. People here compared it to a family separation, a divorce. A year on, one attendee believes it's time to rebuild connections.
Why do we still need to cooperate? Why is that a good thing for the UK? It doesn't take anything away from your nationalism and your identity, but it gives you something in terms of cooperating on the big challenges of the day, sharing information, expertise, pooling, not duplicating, and maintaining rights and standards in so many areas, which is what the European Union is about. And it was never about the EU imposing on Britain. It was about us together working out how to work together and have prosperity and stability together.
Plenty, though, is still left unresolved, notably fishing. It's an industry that accounts for less than 1% of the EU's GDP, but it's politically significant. France is threatening legal action, arguing not enough licences have been granted to French fishermen to catch in British waters.
The UK authorities have to drink Red Bull. They have to speed up a bit because we have been waiting. We are losing money and it's starting to be hard even for our morale, for our health.
And then there's the ongoing dispute over the Northern Ireland Protocol. To prevent a hard border with the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland was kept in the EU's single market, so customs checks have been imposed internally with the rest of the UK.
Morning, Mom.
Britain's newly appointed Brexit negotiator, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, is threatening to tear up the agreement if changes aren't made. European Commission Vice President Maroš Šefčovič warns the entire deal would collapse if the protocol was scrapped. The challenge for the EU will be to find a solution that appeals to all its 27 member states, and also to navigate a future without a traditional political ally, which in the past contributed billions of dollars to its annual budget. Yet with Britain gone, new opportunities have emerged. Collaboration on defence, a possible investment pact with China, and a reinventing of transatlantic relations, as the European Union looks to move on from Brexit. Benji Haya, CGTN, Brussels.
Well, that's all for now on this year's Africa Live Biz. For now, it's back to you, Lindy.
Thank you so much, Uche. Well, do stay with us on Africa Live. Your sports news up next. Coming up, we look back at South African swimmer Tatjana Schoenmaker's rise to global stardom.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Continental, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference. How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
In your sports news, Olympic 200-meter breaststroke champion Tatjana Schoenmaker rose to stardom after her incredible efforts in Tokyo. It has been a roller coaster year for the South African swimmer, who has accomplished a lot in the space of just 12 months. CGTN's Cies du Plessis takes a look back at the year that has been for the swimming star.
In January 2021, Tatjana Schoenmaker was coming out of months of inactivity enforced by a stringent lockdown and preparing for her first Olympic Games.
I just want to go out there, swim our best times. I mean, a PB takes so long for a swimmer to drop time. So if I could swim a PB, I'm sure I'll be able to get into the final then. And then if you have a lane, you have a chance.
On the eve of her first event in Tokyo, the 100-meter breaststroke, the 24-year-old was eager to dip her toes in the water and represent her country on the biggest stage of them all.
I'm very excited and I can't wait to race. Excited to race and then go and celebrate at home on this amazing achievement of just being here.